A pilot's helmet recovered from the Montana mountains revealed a secret that had been hidden for 81 years. The bullet hole inside and the German-coded document found beside it told the story of a betrayal that took place at Great Falls Air Base in 1943. But what was truly terrifying was that this betrayal had been committed by the most trusted person, by his own crewmate. Before diving into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest cold case revelations. The crisp autumn air of October 1943 carried the distant rumble of aircraft engines across the sprawling landscape of Great Falls Army Air Base in Montana. The base, nestled between the rolling wheat fields of the Great Plains and the towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains, had become one of America's most crucial training facilities for the heavy bomber crews that would soon carry the war deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. Here, beneath the endless Montana sky, young airmen learned the deadly precision required to guide massive B-17 flying fortresses through enemy fighter screens and flak fields to deliver their explosive payloads to strategic targets across occupied Europe. Among these airmen was First Lieutenant Thomas Mitchell, a 26-year-old pilot from the farming community of Cedar Falls, Iowa. Mitchell possessed the steady nerves and quick reflexes that marked the finest of America's bomber pilots, combined with an analytical mind that could process the countless variables of high-altitude formation flying while under enemy fire. His crew respected him for his competence and trusted him with their lives, knowing that his skill and judgment would determine whether they returned safely from their missions over Europe. Mitchell had arrived at Great Falls in August 1943. Fresh from advanced pilot training in Texas, eager to complete his crew training and join the massive bombing campaign that was slowly but inexorably grinding down Germany's capacity to wage war. His letters home to his parents, Harold and Ruth Mitchell, spoke of his pride in flying the mighty B-17 and his confidence that he and his crew would contribute meaningfully to the Allied victory that seemed increasingly certain with each passing month. The crew that had been assigned to Mitchell represented a cross-section of wartime America: farm boys from the Midwest, factory workers from Detroit, college students from California, all united by their common purpose of defeating fascism and returning home to build the peaceful world for which they were fighting. Among them was Second Lieutenant Franz Weber, Mitchell's co-pilot, a quiet, competent officer who had earned Mitchell's trust and respect through weeks of intensive training flights over the Montana wilderness. Weber appeared to be everything that the Army Air Forces valued in an officer: technically proficient, calm under pressure, and utterly reliable in the execution of his duties. He had graduated near the top of his flight training class, demonstrated exceptional skill in navigation and aircraft systems, and shown the kind of leadership potential that marked him for rapid promotion and increased responsibility. His fellow crew members appreciated his dry sense of humor and his willingness to share knowledge and experience that helped make them all better at their jobs. What none of them knew was that Franz Weber was not the Iowa farm boy he claimed to be. His real name was Franz Weber, and he was a deep cover agent of the German Abwehr, military intelligence service of the Third Reich. Weber had been placed in American society years before the war began, establishing a false identity so complete and convincing that it had withstood the intense scrutiny of military background investigations and security clearances. Weber's infiltration into American society represented one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations ever conducted by Nazi Germany on American soil. His false identity had been constructed meticulously, complete with fabricated birth records, school transcripts, employment history, and personal relationships that created the illusion of a normal American life. He spoke English without trace of accent, understood American customs and culture intimately, and had even served briefly in the National Guard before the war to establish his patriotic credentials. The mission that had brought Weber to Great Falls Army Air Base was part of a larger German intelligence operation designed to gather detailed information about American bomber tactics, aircraft capabilities, and crew training procedures that could be used to improve German air defenses and reduce the effectiveness of the Allied bombing campaign. Weber's position as a co-pilot gave him access to classified information about flight procedures, navigation techniques, and aircraft performance characteristics that would be invaluable to German military planners. For months, Weber had been carefully gathering and transmitting intelligence through a sophisticated communication network that reached from the Montana training bases to the highest levels of German military command. His reports included detailed assessments of American pilot training methods, evaluations of B-17 vulnerabilities and defensive capabilities, and information about new tactics and technologies being developed for use against German targets. The intelligence that Weber provided was contributing directly to the development of German fighter tactics and anti-aircraft procedures that were increasing the casualty rates among American bomber crews over Europe. Each piece of information that he transmitted represented potential death sentences for young airmen who had no idea that their training secrets were being sold to the enemy by one of their own trusted officers. Weber's success in maintaining his cover while conducting his espionage activities was facilitated by the chaotic atmosphere of wartime military expansion, which made it difficult for security personnel to maintain close surveillance of everyone. Moreover, his carefully cultivated reputation for competence and reliability made him one of the last people who would be suspected of treasonous activities. The first sign that Weber's mission might be compromised came in early October 1943, when he became aware that First Lieutenant Mitchell had been asking questions about certain aspects of their training flights that suggested a level of curiosity that went beyond normal professional interest. Mitchell had noticed inconsistencies in Weber's explanations of various procedures and had begun to pay closer attention to his co-pilot's activities during and after their training missions. Mitchell's suspicions had been aroused initially by small things. Weber's tendency to take detailed notes about aspects of their flights that seemed unrelated to normal training objectives, his unusual interest in classified information about navigation procedures and aircraft capabilities, and his habit of asking probing questions about other crews' activities and performance. These observations might have seemed insignificant to most people, but Mitchell possessed the kind of analytical mind that noticed patterns and remembered details. The situation became critical for Weber when Mitchell discovered evidence that suggested his co-pilot was transmitting information through unauthorized communication channels. During a routine inspection of their aircraft, Mitchell had noticed that certain radio equipment had been modified in ways that would allow for clandestine transmissions, and he had begun to suspect that Weber was responsible for these modifications. Mitchell faced a terrible dilemma. His discovery of Weber's apparent treasonous activities placed him in possession of information that could expose a major security breach and potentially save American lives, but it also placed him in mortal danger, as Weber would undoubtedly kill to protect his cover and continue his mission. Mitchell had to decide whether to report his suspicions immediately, risking that Weber might escape justice, or to gather more evidence to ensure that his accusations would be taken seriously and lead to a conviction. The decision to continue his investigation rather than report immediately would prove to be fatal. Mitchell began carefully documenting Weber's activities, taking photographs when possible, and keeping detailed notes about suspicious behaviors. He planned to present a complete case to military intelligence officers armed with irrefutable evidence that would expose Weber's espionage activities and potentially lead to the discovery of other German agents operating within the American military system. But Weber was far too experienced and cautious an operator to allow his activities to be observed without taking notice. His training in counterintelligence techniques had taught him to be constantly vigilant for signs that his cover might be compromised, and he quickly became aware that Mitchell was watching him with unusual interest. Weber's analysis of the situation told him that Mitchell represented an existential threat to his mission and potentially to his life. If Mitchell's suspicions were reported to military intelligence, Weber would face exposure, arrest, trial, and almost certain execution as a spy and traitor. The only way to eliminate this threat was to eliminate Mitchell himself, but this would have to be accomplished in a way that would not arouse suspicion or compromise Weber's position within the military hierarchy. The solution that Weber devised was both elegant and terrifying in its calculated coldness. He would arrange for Mitchell to die during what appeared to be a routine training flight, making the killing look like an aircraft accident that claimed the life of a promising young officer. The vast wilderness of Montana provided the perfect setting for such a crime, with thousands of square miles of remote mountain terrain where an aircraft could crash and remain undiscovered for years or even decades. Weber's plan began to take shape in mid-October 1943, when he volunteered to accompany Mitchell on a solo training flight designed to improve their coordination as a pilot-copilot team. This type of flight was common in the intensive training program at Great Falls, and Weber's suggestion that they conduct additional practice sessions was seen as evidence of his dedication to excellence rather than any indication of sinister intent. The flight that Weber proposed would take them over some of the most remote and rugged terrain in Montana, ostensibly to practice navigation and emergency procedures in challenging conditions. Weber had carefully studied the topography of their planned route, identifying locations where an aircraft crash would be unlikely to be discovered quickly, if at all, and where the terrain would make search and rescue operations difficult or impossible. On the morning of October 18, 1943, Mitchell and Weber conducted their pre-flight inspection of their assigned B-17, a routine procedure that took on deadly significance as Weber ensured that certain safety systems had been subtly compromised in ways that would not be noticed during normal inspection, but would contribute to the aircraft's destruction during the planned accident. The weather conditions that morning were perfect for flying, with clear skies and unlimited visibility that would allow Weber to execute his plan with precision while ensuring that any subsequent search efforts would have the best possible conditions for locating the crash site. This was crucial to Weber's strategy, as he needed the wreckage to be found eventually to confirm Mitchell's death and prevent suspicions that might arise if the aircraft simply vanished without trace. Mitchell climbed into the pilot's seat with his usual confidence, running through the extensive checklist of procedures required to prepare the massive bomber for flight. Weber took his position as co-pilot, his outward calm masking the cold determination with which he prepared to commit the ultimate act of betrayal against a man who trusted him with his life. The B-17 lifted off from Great Falls Army Air Base at 0800 hours, its 4 Wright Cyclone engines carrying the aircraft and its 2-man crew into the crisp Montana morning air. Air traffic controllers noted the departure in their logs, recording the aircraft's planned route and expected return time, creating the official record that would later become crucial evidence in the investigation of what appeared to be a tragic accident. For the first hour of the flight, everything proceeded according to the planned training mission. Mitchell flew the aircraft through a series of practice maneuvers designed to improve their coordination and communication, while Weber fulfilled his role as co-pilot with the same competence and professionalism that had earned Mitchell's trust. To any observer, they would have appeared to be exactly what they claimed to be, 2 dedicated officers working to perfect their skills for the deadly missions that awaited them over Europe. The transformation from routine training flight to premeditated execution began as the B-17 approached the remote mountain region that Weber had selected for his crime. Using his knowledge of the aircraft systems and his position as co-pilot, Weber began to systematically disable the safety systems and communication equipment that might allow Mitchell to call for help or survive what was about to happen. The attack itself was swift and brutal, demonstrating the combat training that Weber had concealed so carefully during his months at Great Falls. Mitchell, focused on flying the aircraft through challenging mountain terrain, had no warning that his trusted co-pilot had become his executioner. Weber struck with a combination of professional efficiency and personal ruthlessness that left no doubt about his true nature and loyalties. With Mitchell incapacitated, Weber took control of the aircraft and guided it toward a predetermined crash site in a remote mountain valley where the wreckage would be visible to search aircraft, but where the terrain would make ground access extremely difficult. His plan called for him to parachute from the aircraft shortly before impact, leaving behind evidence that would support the story he had prepared to explain his survival and Mitchell's death. Weber's parachute descent into the Montana wilderness was the most dangerous part of his plan, requiring precise timing and considerable luck to avoid injury or death in the rugged terrain. He landed hard in a rocky area several miles from the planned crash site, suffering minor injuries that actually supported his cover story by providing evidence of his ordeal in surviving what appeared to be a catastrophic aircraft accident. The explosion and fire that marked the B-17's impact with the mountainside could be seen and heard for miles, creating the dramatic evidence of aviation disaster that Weber needed to support his deception. The aircraft's fuel load ensured that the fire would burn hot and long, destroying much of the evidence that might contradict Weber's story while leaving enough recognizable wreckage to confirm that a crash had occurred. Weber spent the next 18 hours making his way through the wilderness toward civilization, carefully crafting the details of the story he would tell about the accident that had claimed his pilot's life. His account would emphasize Mitchell's heroic attempts to save the aircraft after a mechanical failure, Weber's own desperate struggle to survive after bailing out, and his grief at losing a respected colleague and friend. When Weber finally reached a remote ranch house and was able to contact military authorities, his story of survival against impossible odds made him an instant hero. His dramatic account of the aircraft's mechanical failure, Mitchell's valiant but futile attempts to maintain control, and his own narrow escape from death was exactly the kind of inspiring tale that military public relations officers love to share with the press and the public. The search and rescue operation that was launched immediately upon Weber's report located the crash site within hours, confirming his story about the aircraft's destruction and the apparent death of First Lieutenant Mitchell. The wreckage was scattered across several acres of mountainside, with the main fuselage buried deep in a rocky ravine where the force of impact and subsequent fire had destroyed most of the evidence that might have revealed the truth about what had really happened. The investigation into the crash was conducted by experienced military accident investigators who had examined dozens of similar incidents during the rapid expansion of pilot training programs throughout the war. Their preliminary findings supported Weber's account of mechanical failure leading to loss of control and subsequent crash, with no evidence of enemy action, sabotage, or pilot error that might have contributed to the tragedy. Weber's survival story made him a celebrity within the military community at Great Falls, and eventually throughout the Army Air Forces. His account of the crash was featured in military publications and civilian newspapers, portraying him as an example of the courage and determination that characterized America's fighting men. The irony that a German spy was being celebrated as an American hero was lost on everyone except Weber himself, who used his newfound fame to advance his espionage mission. The official conclusion that Mitchell had died in the crash was based on the absence of his body from the wreckage, which investigators attributed to the intensity of the fire and the rugged terrain that might have scattered remains over a wide area. Weber's testimony about Mitchell's final moments provided the official record of a brave pilot who had died trying to save his aircraft and his crew member, adding another name to the growing list of American airmen who had given their lives in training for the war against fascism. For Mitchell's family in Iowa, the news of their son's death was devastating, but also carried a measure of pride that he had died as a hero while serving his country. Harold and Ruth Mitchell received the standard military notification of their son's death in service, along with the personal effects that had been recovered from the base and the medals that recognized his sacrifice. Weber himself wrote a personal letter to the Mitchell family, describing their son's courage and professionalism in terms that brought some comfort to grieving parents. The success of Weber's deception was complete. Not only had he eliminated the threat that Mitchell's suspicions posed to his mission, but he had done so in a way that actually enhanced his own position and reputation within the military community. His survival story and the tragic loss of his pilot created a bond of sympathy and respect that made other personnel even less likely to suspect him of any wrongdoing. Weber used his enhanced status to expand his intelligence-gathering activities, taking advantage of the access and trust that his heroic reputation provided to gather even more detailed information about American bomber operations. His reports to German intelligence included not only technical data about aircraft and tactics, but also valuable intelligence about morale, training effectiveness, and the planned expansion of the bombing campaign against German targets. The intelligence that Weber continued to provide was contributing to German defensive preparations that would cost hundreds of American lives over the coming months. Fighter tactics based on his reports about formation flying procedures, anti-aircraft deployments guided by his intelligence about approach routes and altitudes, and early warning systems improved by his information about navigation techniques all worked to increase the casualty rates among the bomber crews who were carrying the war to Germany itself. Weber's continued success as a spy was facilitated by the complete absence of suspicion about Mitchell's death. The aircraft accident had been investigated thoroughly and closed as a case of mechanical failure resulting in pilot fatality, with no evidence of foul play or security breach that might have prompted a broader investigation of personnel with access to sensitive information. As 1943 gave way to 1944, Weber received new instructions from his German handlers that expanded his mission beyond simple intelligence gathering to include sabotage operations designed to disrupt American training activities and reduce the effectiveness of bomber crews being prepared for combat deployment. These operations required even greater care and sophistication to avoid detection while maximizing their impact on American military capabilities. The sabotage activities that Weber conducted were subtle and difficult to detect, designed to appear as equipment failures, training accidents, or human error rather than deliberate acts of enemy action. He arranged for aircraft engines to develop problems during critical training phases, caused navigation equipment to malfunction during important exercises, and introduced errors into training materials that would degrade the effectiveness of bomber crews without being obvious enough to attract attention. Each successful sabotage operation increased Weber's value to the German intelligence apparatus, while also bringing him closer to the eventual detection that would end his remarkable career as a spy. The accumulation of seemingly unrelated incidents began to form a pattern that would eventually attract the attention of American counterintelligence services, though this process would take many months to develop into actionable intelligence. The first indication that Weber's activities might be under suspicion came in the spring of 1944, when he noticed subtle changes in security procedures at Great Falls that suggested increased surveillance of personnel activities. Background investigations were being conducted more thoroughly, personnel movements were being monitored more closely, and access to sensitive information was being restricted in ways that hadn't been necessary earlier in the war. Weber also became aware that some of his fellow officers were being questioned about their observations of unusual activities or behaviors among their colleagues, suggesting that American intelligence services had begun to suspect that enemy agents might be operating within the military community. These developments forced Weber to reduce his activities and take additional precautions to avoid detection, but they also indicated that his time at Great Falls might be limited. The decision to transfer Weber to a different assignment came in mid-1944, ostensibly as recognition of his heroic survival and his exemplary service record, but actually as part of a broader counterintelligence operation designed to disrupt suspected enemy activities by reassigning personnel who might be involved in espionage operations. Weber's transfer to a training facility in Texas effectively ended his intelligence-gathering mission at Great Falls, while also removing him from the scene of his crimes. Weber's new assignment in Texas provided him with different opportunities for intelligence gathering and sabotage, but it also placed him in an environment where security was even tighter and where his activities were subject to closer scrutiny. The increased security measures that had been implemented throughout the military as the war progressed made it increasingly difficult for him to operate with the same freedom and effectiveness that he had enjoyed in Montana. The end of the war in Europe in May 1945 fundamentally changed Weber's situation and mission. With the defeat of Nazi Germany, his handlers were no longer able to provide direction or support for his activities, and he found himself essentially stranded as a German spy in American territory with no clear mission or means of extraction. Weber's decision to remain in the United States after the war and attempt to continue his life under his false identity was motivated partly by practical considerations and partly by his realization that his value as an intelligence asset had ended with Germany's defeat. he arranged for his discharge from the military and established himself as a civilian in a small town in Colorado, where he hoped to live quietly while avoiding the attention of authorities who might be searching for German agents. Under his false identity as Frank Weber, he married a local woman, established a small business, and became what appeared to be a model American citizen, contributing to community activities and establishing himself as a respected member of society. His wartime service record, including his survival of the aircraft crash that had supposedly killed his pilot, provided him with veterans' benefits and social status that helped him integrate into post-war American society. For more than 3 decades, Weber lived successfully as Frank Weber, raising a family, building a business, and participating in community life without anyone suspecting his true identity or his wartime crimes. He attended veterans' reunions, contributed to military charities, and even spoke occasionally to community groups about his wartime experiences, always portraying himself as a fortunate survivor who owed his life to the sacrifice of his heroic pilot. Weber's death in 1978, at the age of 67, appeared to close the final chapter in what had been one of the most successful deep-cover intelligence operations in military history. His obituary in the local Colorado newspaper described him as a war hero who had overcome the trauma of losing his pilot and crewmates to build a successful life in America, contributing to his community and raising a family that could be proud of his service and sacrifice. But Weber's death did not end the story of Thomas Mitchell, whose fate remained unknown to his family and to military historians who had accepted the official explanation of his death in an aircraft accident. The Mitchell family had grieved for their son and honored his memory, but they had never known that he had actually died, not as the victim of mechanical failure, but as the victim of calculated betrayal by the man he had trusted most. The truth about Mitchell's fate remained buried in the remote mountains of Montana for decades, protected by the isolation of the crash site and by the complete success of Weber's deception. Occasional hiking expeditions and hunting trips through the area never located any evidence that would contradict the official story of the aircraft accident, and the case remained closed in military files as a resolved matter requiring no further investigation. The breakthrough that would finally reveal the truth came in 2019, when a team of hikers exploring a remote mountain valley discovered human remains that appeared to be much older than typical hiking or hunting casualties. The hikers contacted local authorities, who in turn notified federal agencies with jurisdiction over potential military casualties from past conflicts. Diawant Shera Chen, a forensic anthropologist working with the Defense POW Solgmia accounting agency, was assigned to investigate the discovery and determine whether the remains might be connected to any unresolved military cases. Her initial examination suggested that the remains were those of a young male who had died approximately 75 years earlier, consistent with casualties from World War II training accidents or combat operations. More detailed forensic analysis revealed evidence that was inconsistent with the official explanation of Mitchell's death in an aircraft crash. The remains showed signs of trauma that suggested violence rather than accident, and the location where they were found was several miles from the recorded crash site, suggesting that the victim had not died in the aircraft but had been killed elsewhere and his body moved or hidden. The discovery that shocked investigators even more was the presence of personal effects that had been carefully concealed with the remains, including documents and photographs that told a completely different story about Mitchell's final day. Among these items was a diary that Mitchell had been keeping, with entries that documented his growing suspicions about Weber's activities and his plan to report those suspicions to military intelligence. The diary entries provided a chilling account of Mitchell's gradual realization that his trusted co-pilot was actually an enemy agent, and his struggle to decide how to handle this discovery without compromising his own safety. The final entry, dated the morning of the fatal flight, expressed Mitchell's determination to gather additional evidence before making his report and his concern that Weber might be becoming suspicious of his interest. Even more damaging to Weber's carefully constructed story was the discovery of physical evidence that contradicted key elements of his account of the aircraft accident. Analysis of the remains and the scene where they were found indicated that Mitchell had been killed by gunshot rather than dying in the crash, and that his body had been moved to the location where it was discovered rather than being scattered by the impact and fire. The FBI investigation that was launched following these discoveries quickly uncovered additional evidence that exposed the full extent of Weber's deception. Military records that had been classified for decades were reviewed, revealing inconsistencies in Weber's story that had been overlooked during the original investigation. More importantly, declassified intelligence files contained information about German espionage operations that included references to an agent who matched Weber's description and activities. The most conclusive evidence came from German military archives that had been captured at the end of the war but had never been fully analyzed. These files contained detailed reports from Weber about his intelligence-gathering activities at Great Falls, including specific references to Mitchell as a potential security threat who would need to be eliminated to protect the mission. The revelation that Mitchell had been killed by his own co-pilot rather than having died in an aircraft accident sent shockwaves through the military and intelligence communities. The case represented not only a long-delayed resolution to a World War II mystery, but also a sobering reminder of the sophistication and ruthlessness of enemy intelligence operations that had succeeded in penetrating American military institutions. For the Mitchell family, now represented by distant relatives who had preserved the memory of their war hero, the discovery brought a mixture of vindication and renewed grief. The family had never questioned the official explanation of Mitchell's death, but the revelation that he had actually been executed by a German spy while trying to protect American interests transformed him from a training accident victim into a genuine war hero who had died in the line of duty. The military held a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery to honor Mitchell's true sacrifice and to officially correct the record regarding his service and death. His remains were interred with full military honors, and his family was presented with additional medals and recognition that acknowledged his role in counterintelligence activities that had cost him his life. The case also prompted a broader re-examination of other unexplained deaths and disappearances from World War II training bases, as investigators recognized that German infiltration of American military institutions had been far more extensive and deadly than previously understood. Several other cases were reopened based on information discovered in the Mitchell investigation, leading to additional revelations about enemy agents who had operated successfully within American military communities. The resolution of the Mitchell case after 81 years stands as a testament to the persistence of investigators who refuse to accept convenient explanations for complex mysteries, and to the power of modern forensic science to reveal truths that had been hidden for generations. It demonstrates that even the most carefully planned and executed deceptions can eventually be exposed through the combination of new evidence, advanced technology, and the dedicated efforts of those who seek justice. The story of Thomas Mitchell and Franz Weber serves as a powerful reminder of the hidden costs of war and the personal betrayals that occur when nations fight for their survival. It illustrates the courage of individuals who risk everything to protect their country from enemy infiltration, and the terrible price that such courage sometimes demands. In Great Falls, Montana, a memorial was erected at the site where Mitchell's remains were discovered, bearing his name and a simple inscription. The memorial serves as a reminder that the war against fascism was fought not only on distant battlefields, but also within American communities, where enemy agents sought to undermine the nation's war effort through deception, betrayal, and targeted assassination. The resolution of the Mitchell case also highlighted the importance of vigilance in protecting national security interests, demonstrating that enemy agents can achieve remarkable success when they are able to establish deep cover identities and gain the trust of those they seek to betray. Weber's success in maintaining his false identity for decades after the war ended serves as a warning about the long-term persistence of security threats and the need for continued vigilance in identifying and neutralizing enemy operations. As the investigation files were finally closed in 2024, they carried with them the lessons learned from one of World War II's most carefully concealed crimes. The story of the young bomber pilot who died trying to expose enemy infiltration had finally been told, bringing closure to a mystery that had haunted the Montana mountains for more than 8 decades and ensuring that Thomas Mitchell would be remembered not as an accident victim, but as a hero who gave his life in defense of his country and his fellow airmen.